My name is Rebecca Mitchell, and I'm 32 years old. 18 years ago, my parents abandoned me at my grandfather's doorstep like an unwanted package. Last month, they suddenly reappeared at Grandpa Williams while reading, dollar signs practically glowing in their eyes at the mention of his $45 million estate. They had no idea what was coming. The ornate brass key Grandpa had given me years before would unlock more than just his mysterious wooden box. It would unlock justice. I still remember watching their car disappear down that gravel driveway when I was 14, not knowing they wouldn't look back for nearly 2 decades. Before I tell you how I turned the tables on the people who threw me away, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe to join my journey of healing and justice. Growing up, I thought we were a normal family. My early childhood memories from ages 5 to 12 seem typical on the surface. We lived in a 4-bedroom house in a respectable suburb of Boston. I had my own room decorated with horse posters and science fair ribbons. We took vacations to Florida every winter. From the outside, everything looked picture perfect. My father, James Mitchell, worked as a financial advisor at a mid-sized firm downtown. He was tall, always impeccably dressed, and had a booming laugh he'd use strategically at business dinners. But at home, that laugh rarely made an appearance. Dad was constantly working, constantly networking, constantly chasing the next big client or deal. "This is how we maintain our lifestyle, Becky," he'd say whenever I complained about his absence at school events. "Nothing in this world comes free." My mother, Catherine, was equally focused on appearances. She maintained a meticulous figure through rigorous tennis sessions and lunches where salad was the only acceptable order. Her social calendar was her Bible. Charity committees, neighborhood association meetings, book clubs that rarely discussed books. Connections are currency, she'd remind me while applying her lipstick in the hallway mirror before rushing off to another event. The first cracks in our family facade appeared whenever Grandpa William came up in conversation. Dad's father was a self-made millionaire who had built a manufacturing company from scratch in the 1970s and sold it for a fortune in the late 90s. But unlike my parents, who stretched themselves thin trying to appear wealthy, Grandpa actually was wealthy, yet lived modestly in a comfortable but simple farmhouse about 2 hours away from us in rural Massachusetts. "Your father is the most stubborn man alive," Dad would complain after phone calls with Grandpa. "Sitting on all that money while living like a farmer. He could be enjoying luxury, helping his family, setting up his granddaughter's future." What my father meant, I later realized, was that Grandpa William refused to fund my parents' escalating lifestyle demands. My summers with Grandpa were the highlight of my childhood. 2 blissful weeks every July when I'd escape to his farmhouse, where the air smelled of fresh-cut grass and the nights were filled with fireflies and stories. Grandpa taught me to fish in the pond behind his property, to play chess on the hand-carved set in his study, and most importantly, to value substance over appearance. "The measure of a person isn't in what they have, Becky," he'd say as we sat on his porch swing watching the sunset. "It's in what they give, who they help, and how they act when nobody's looking." These lessons infuriated my parents, who would drill me with questions upon my return, hoping to glean information about Grandpa's finances or whether he'd mentioned them in his will. Then came 2008. The recession hit when I was 12, and our family's financial situation grew increasingly precarious. Dad's clients were losing money, and his commission-based income plummeted. Mom's friends began canceling their country club memberships, and suddenly our family's struggle to keep up appearances became even more desperate. The arguments between my parents intensified, always behind closed doors, but the walls in our house weren't thick enough to muffle their angry whispers. One night, I overheard them discussing a fresh opportunity in Europe. Dad had connections at a bank in Switzerland. They could make a new start there. The conversation excited them in a way I hadn't seen in months. What I didn't understand then was where, or if, I figured into these plans. My 14th birthday dawned gray and drizzly, matching the mood in our house perfectly. Instead of presents or pancakes, I woke to the sound of suitcases being dragged across hardwood floors. When I came downstairs in my pajamas, Mom and Dad were in the kitchen, papers spread across the counter, speaking in those hushed, urgent tones they'd been using for months. "Oh, you're up," Mom said, barely glancing at me. "Get dressed quickly. We need to talk." There was no happy birthday. No acknowledgement of the day at all. Just Dad looking at his watch impatiently while Mom poured herself more coffee. When I returned dressed, they sat me down and explained their plan with forced smiles and rehearsed optimism. "We're taking you to stay with Grandpa William for a little while," Dad said, his tone suggesting this was some kind of treat rather than the bombshell it was. "Just temporarily, while we get some business sorted out in Europe." "What about school? My friends?" "It's the middle of the semester," I protested, my voice cracking. "You'll transfer. It's a better school district anyway," Mom replied dismissively. "Your grandfather already agreed. We're leaving in an hour." I was given 30 minutes to pack essentials into one suitcase. As I moved through my room in a daze, grabbing random items, I heard Mom on the phone with a real estate agent discussing our house. The drive to Grandpa's took just over 2 hours, but it felt like crossing an ocean. I sat in the back seat, watching raindrops race down the window, each one carrying away another piece of the life I was leaving behind. My parents chatted tensely in the front, discussing flight times and rental arrangements abroad. They spoke as if I wasn't there. When we pulled up to Grandpa's farmhouse, he was waiting on the porch. Even through my confusion and hurt, I felt a surge of warmth seeing him. He looked older than he had last summer, his tall frame slightly stooped, but his blue eyes, the same color as mine, were sharp and knowing. He hugged me tightly while my parents unloaded my single suitcase. "We'll call as soon as we're settled," Mom said, giving me a quick, perfunctory hug. Her perfume, always too strong, lingered after she pulled away. "Should just be a few weeks," Dad added, patting my shoulder awkwardly. "This opportunity can't wait. You understand, right, Becky?" I didn't understand. Not at all. But I nodded because that's what I'd always done, try to be the good, undemanding daughter they wanted. As their car disappeared down the long gravel driveway, Grandpa's hand settled on my shoulder. When I looked up at him, I saw something in his expression that frightened me, pity mixed with resignation, as if he'd expected this day would come. "Let's get you settled, child," he said gently. "I made up the blue bedroom for you." That night, after discovering my parents had packed mostly summer clothes despite it being October, I cried myself to sleep in Grandpa's guest room. I still believed they would call the next day, that this was temporary, that they wouldn't miss my birthday. They didn't call the next day, or the day after. A week passed. Then 2. When Grandpa finally received a brief email from them, they were already settled in Geneva. They needed more time. They'd be in touch about arrangements. 3 weeks after being left at Grandpa's, I discovered through a former friend's social media post that our house in Boston had been sold. My room, my remaining possessions, my life there, all gone without a word to me. Then came the email that Grandpa tried to hide from me, but which I found open on his computer one afternoon while he was out getting groceries. It was from my mother, clinical and detached. "William, we've decided to make our move to Switzerland permanent. This fresh start is what James and I need, and bringing Rebecca over would only complicate things. Teenagers need stability, and uprooting her again would be unfair. We're sure you can provide a better environment for her at this stage. We'll send holiday gifts and maintain contact, of course. Please handle any necessary guardianship paperwork with our lawyer, whose contact information is below." I was a burden they'd offloaded, an inconvenience to their fresh start, a complication. Grandpa found me still sitting at his computer, tears streaming down my face. He didn't offer empty reassurances. Instead, he sat beside me, his weathered hand covering mine. "I'm not going anywhere, Rebecca," he said, using my full name for the first time I could remember. "You have a home here for as long as you want it. The following weeks were a blur of paperwork and meetings. Grandpa formally became my legal guardian. I was enrolled in the local high school. We went shopping for winter clothes and school supplies. Through it all, Grandpa was steady and practical, giving me space to grieve while ensuring life moved forward. That first Christmas, without my parents, I received a package from Switzerland containing an expensive cashmere sweater in the wrong size and a gift card. The card was signed Love, Mom and Dad in my mother's handwriting, but contained no personal message, no questions about my life, no invitation to visit. Grandpa, seeing my disappointment, took me out to cut down our own Christmas tree that afternoon. As we decorated it with his collection of handmade ornaments, some dating back to when my father was a child, he told me stories about holidays long past. That night, he gave me a simple silver locket containing a tiny photo of the two of us from the previous summer. Family, he told me, is proved by actions, not by blood or claims. Remember that, Rebecca. I wore that locket every day for the next 18 years. The farmhouse that had once been my summer getaway became my permanent home. My temporary bedroom evolved into a space that reflected my changing identity. Grandpa helped me paint the walls a deep blue, built bookshelves for my growing collection, and cleared space in the barn for the small pottery studio he surprised me with on my 15th birthday. Unlike my parents' household of strict rules and appearances, Grandpa's approach to raising a teenager was supportive, but refreshingly straightforward. I'm too old to play games or pretend, he told me one evening as we washed dishes side by side. So here's my deal. Be honest with me, try your best at whatever you do, and think about the kind of person you want to become. I'll provide the same honesty, do my best to help you, and share what I've learned in my 70 years. Sound fair? It sounded more than fair. It sounded like freedom. Living with Grandpa meant adjusting to a simpler lifestyle than I'd known in Boston. His farmhouse was comfortable but not luxurious. We ate home-cooked meals instead of restaurant fare. Our entertainment came from books, board games, and occasional trips to the local theater rather than expensive vacations or shopping sprees. Yet paradoxically, it was during these years that I learned Grandpa was far wealthier than my parents had ever been. One rainy afternoon, while helping him organize his study, I came across financial statements revealing his net worth was in the tens of millions. Why do you live so simply when you could afford anything? I asked him, genuinely puzzled. Grandpa looked up from the book he was reading, those blue eyes twinkling. Because anything isn't worth having, and some things aren't either. Money is just a tool, Rebecca. It can't buy purpose or character or peace. Your parents never understood that. Over cups of hot chocolate, Grandpa explained how he'd built his manufacturing business from a small workshop into a company with hundreds of employees. How he'd sold it for a fortune but kept his lifestyle modest, because extravagance had never made him happy. How he'd quietly used his wealth to fund scholarships and support local businesses. The best thing money can buy is freedom, he explained. Not freedom to show off, but freedom to live according to your values without fear. Those conversations shaped my understanding of wealth in ways my parents' endless status-seeking never could have. The emotional healing took longer than the practical adjustments. At Grandpa's insistence, I started seeing Dr. Harmon, a grief counselor in town who specialized in family trauma. But nobody died, I protested before my first appointment. You lost your parents, your home, and your sense of security all at once, Grandpa replied gently. That's a kind of death. Dr. Harmon helped me understand that my parents' abandonment wasn't my fault, that their choices reflected their own character flaws, not my worthiness. The work was painful but necessary. School became my sanctuary. Without my parents' pressure to maintain a certain image, I discovered genuine joy in learning. My grades, always good, became exceptional. I joined the debate team, wrote for the school newspaper, and made real friends who knew the truth about my situation and still accepted me. At 16, with Grandpa's guidance, I started a small online business selling handcrafted jewelry I made in my pottery studio. It wasn't particularly profitable, but it taught me valuable lessons about entrepreneurship, creative problem solving, and perseverance. Grandpa treated my business seriously, offering advice when asked but never taking over. Throughout these years, I made regular attempts to maintain contact with my parents. I wrote detailed emails about my life, achievements, and questions about theirs. Their responses, when they came at all, were brief and superficial. They sent occasional gifts for birthdays and Christmas, always expensive, rarely personal, but never visited. Our twice-yearly phone calls were awkward affairs filled with their vague promises about visiting soon or bringing you to Europe when the timing is right. By my high school graduation, I'd stopped believing those promises. The ceremony itself was bittersweet. Watching other students with their extended families, I felt the absence of my parents acutely. But when I walked across the stage to receive my diploma as valedictorian, Grandpa's thunderous applause from the front row filled something in my chest that had been hollow for years. At the small celebration he hosted afterward, Grandpa presented me with two gifts: a check covering my full college tuition, and a letter that made me cry more than any communication from my parents ever had. "Rebecca," it read, "I've watched you transform from a wounded child into a remarkable young woman of integrity, intelligence, and compassion. Your parents missed witnessing this miracle, and that loss is entirely theirs. I couldn't be prouder to be your grandfather, your guardian, and your friend. Your future is limitless, not because of any financial support I can provide, but because of who you've chosen to become despite life's unfairness. This is just the beginning." That fall, I moved into my college dormitory to study business and psychology, carrying Grandpa's words with me like a talisman. College was liberating in ways I hadn't anticipated. Away from the small town where everyone knew my story, I could define myself on my own terms. No one looked at me with pity as the girl whose parents left her. I was simply Rebecca Mitchell, business major with a psychology minor, the girl who made interesting jewelry and always had snacks during study sessions. I thrived academically, making the dean's list every semester. But more importantly, I developed friendships that filled the family-shaped hole in my life. My roommate Allison became the sister I never had, calling me out when I was being stubborn and standing fiercely by my side when old insecurities surfaced. Marcus from my marketing class became my best friend and confidant, the person who could make me laugh even during finals week. Together with a few others, they formed my chosen family. We celebrated holidays together, supported each other through breakups and breakthroughs, and it created traditions that were entirely our own. When I finally told them the full story of my parents' abandonment, their outrage on my behalf was both comforting and validating. Through distant relatives and occasional social media stalking, I gathered glimpses of my parents' lives abroad. They'd established themselves in Geneva's expatriate community, my father working for an international investment firm, my mother active in exclusive social circles. Photos showed them at sailing events on Lake Geneva, at ski chalets in the Alps, at champagne receptions with well-dressed strangers. They looked tanned, polished, and perfectly at ease in their child-free existence. I told myself their absence was no longer painful. Most days, I almost believed it. During my junior year, Grandpa's health began to falter. What started as a touch of arthritis progressed to concerning cardiac symptoms that required regular monitoring. Though he downplayed his condition in our daily phone calls, the strain in his voice prompted me to come home every weekend I could manage. "You should be enjoying college, not playing nurse," he protested one Friday when I arrived to find him looking pale and tired. "I am enjoying college," I replied, unpacking groceries I'd brought. "And I'm enjoying being here with you." Those things aren't mutually exclusive. The truth was, I needed those weekends as much as he did. College was exhilarating but exhausting. Grandpa's farmhouse remained my true north, the place where I could breathe deeply and remember who I was beneath the busy student exterior. I graduated with honors, Grandpa beaming proudly from the audience despite the portable oxygen tank he now required. My parents sent an expensive watch and a brief congratulatory email, claiming business commitments prevented their attendance. I'd stopped expecting anything more. Rather than pursuing corporate jobs like many of my classmates, I decided to build my own marketing consultancy, specializing in helping small businesses establish authentic brand identities. I set up shop in Grandpa's home office, converting the space into a modern workspace while preserving its comforting character. My first clients came through Grandpa's extensive network of business connections. His reputation for integrity opened doors that my youth and inexperience might otherwise have kept closed. But I quickly proved my own worth, delivering results that generated referrals and repeat business. Working from the farmhouse allowed me to help manage Grandpa's increasingly complex medical care. By his 80th birthday, he required daily medications, regular doctor visits, and occasional hospitalizations for complications. Yet his mind remained sharp as ever, and he took genuine interest in my business challenges and successes. We celebrated his birthday with a small gathering of his oldest friends and my chosen family from college. As the party wound down, Grandpa took me aside and pressed a small velvet box into my hands. "This isn't your inheritance," he said, his voice low and serious. "That will come later and differently. This is a gift with instructions." Inside the box was an ornate brass key, intricate and obviously old. "It opens something important," he continued. "But promise me you won't use it until the time is right. You'll know when that is." When I pressed for more information, he simply shook his head. "Some lessons have to unfold in their own time. Just keep it safe." I wore the key on a chain alongside my silver locket, its weight a constant reminder of the mystery to come. As my business grew, I eventually moved into my own apartment in town, a charming space above the local bookstore. But I still visited Grandpa several times a week, helping manage his healthcare, sharing meals, and soaking up his wisdom. My personal life progressed more unevenly than my professional one. Dating was complicated by the abandonment issues I thought I'd resolved, but which resurfaced in intimate relationships. I found myself either expecting betrayal or clinging too tightly, neither approach conducive to healthy romance. The most serious relationship was with Ryan, a kind architect I dated for 2 years. When he accepted a job across the country without discussing it with me first, all my old fears of being left behind resurfaced. We broke up in a painful confrontation where I accused him of abandonment, and he called me unreasonably attached. Heartbroken and questioning my judgment, I retreated to the farmhouse, where Grandpa offered both comfort and clarity. "Love requires vulnerability," he said as we sat on the porch swings that had witnessed so many of our important conversations. "What your parents did taught you that vulnerability leads to pain. That's a hard lesson to unlearn." "Maybe I'm just broken," I said, wiping away tears. Grandpa's hand covered mine, his grip still strong despite his illness. "You're not broken, Rebecca. You're cautious because you've been hurt. There's a difference. Forgiveness isn't about excusing what they did. It's about freeing yourself from letting their actions control your future." "I don't know if I can forgive them," I admitted. "That's okay too," he replied. "Forgiveness isn't an obligation. It's a choice you make when and if you're ready. But don't close your heart to everyone because 2 people didn't deserve it." It was one of many conversations that helped me slowly rebuild my capacity to trust. The call came on a rainy Tuesday morning during a client meeting. Grandpa had collapsed while getting the mail. By the time I reached the hospital, he'd been stabilized, but the doctor's expression told me everything before she spoke a word. "Advanced pancreatic cancer," she explained gently. "It's already metastasized to his liver and lungs." "I'm so sorry." Grandpa, ever practical, took the news with stoic grace. "Well, 82 years is a good run," he said when we were alone. "Especially when the last 18 had you in them." I moved back to the farmhouse that week. My clients were understanding, allowing me to work remotely and reduce my workload. Allison and Marcus took turns visiting, bringing food, movies, and welcome distractions. We set up a hospital bed in the sunroom so Grandpa could watch the birds at his feeders and see the garden he'd tended for decades. As his body weakened, our conversations deepened. We talked about his life before I knew him. His childhood during the Depression, his service in Korea, his marriage to my grandmother who died before I was born, his complicated relationship with my father. James was always searching for something outside himself, Grandpa reflected one evening as twilight settled over the farm. Even as a boy, he was convinced happiness was somewhere else, in something else, with someone else. I failed him somehow in teaching contentment. You didn't fail, I protested. We all make our own choices. Grandpa smiled weakly. That's true. And I've made peace with his. But there are still some things that need to be set right. His cryptic comments grew more frequent as the weeks passed. He'd mention the truth in the box or remind me about when the time comes for the key. When I'd press for details, he'd change the subject or claim fatigue. The mystery came into clearer focus one afternoon when I was helping him organize his papers. In his study stood an antique wooden box about the size of a small suitcase, ornately carved with leaves and vines. I'd seen it throughout my years at the farmhouse, but had never paid it much attention, assuming it contained old photographs or mementos. That's what your key opens, Grandpa said, following my gaze. But not yet. After the will reading. Promise me. I promised, though curiosity nearly consumed me. As Grandpa's condition deteriorated, he made an unexpected request. Contact your parents. Tell them about my condition. My protest was immediate. They don't deserve to know. This isn't about what they deserve, he replied with surprising firmness. It's about who we are. Do it for me, Rebecca. Reluctantly, I sent a brief, factual email to the address I hadn't used in years. The response came with surprising speed. Not with concern for Grandpa's health, but with questions about his estate, his will, and whether they should make arrangements to return temporarily for what they delicately termed the eventuality. I showed Grandpa their response, anger burning behind my eyes. He read it calmly, then handed it back with a sad smile. Some people never change, he said. But that email will serve a purpose. Keep it. In his final weeks, Grandpa spoke often about his hopes for my future. He extracted promises that I would continue building my business, that I would remain connected to the friends who had become my family, that I would consider keeping the farmhouse rather than selling it after he was gone. You don't have to decide now, he assured me. But this place has generations of memories. Think carefully before letting it go. The end came peacefully on a golden October afternoon. I was reading aloud from his favorite Steinbeck novel when I noticed the change in his breathing. Setting the book aside, I took his hand, now so thin and light it seemed it might float away. I'm here, Grandpa, I whispered. His eyes, still that brilliant blue though clouded now with medication and illness, found mine. He squeezed my hand with surprising strength. You were the best thing in my life, Rebecca, he said clearly. Remember who you are. Those were his last words. He slipped away as the sun was setting, painting the room in shades of amber and gold. The days that followed passed in a blur of funeral arrangements and paperwork. The small-town lawyer who had handled Grandpa's affairs for decades, Mr. Henderson, was kind but businesslike as he explained the complex estate I was now responsible for managing. William's assets total approximately $45 million, he informed me, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. The majority is in investments, with significant real estate holdings and several trust accounts. The figure stunned me. I knew Grandpa was wealthy, but not to this degree. He had lived so modestly, his generosity directed toward causes he believed in rather than personal luxury. There are special instructions regarding the will reading, Mr. Henderson continued, and specific people who must be present. When he named my parents among those required attendees, I understood at last what Grandpa had been preparing for all along. The wooden box. the key I'd worn around my neck for 2 years. The email response I'd been instructed to save. A plan was falling into place, orchestrated by a man who'd seen further down the road than any of us. 2 weeks after the funeral, I received word from Mr. Henderson that my parents had booked flights from Geneva and would arrive for the will reading scheduled for the following Monday. After 18 years of absence, they were rushing back with remarkable speed now that millions were at stake. They didn't contact me directly until they landed, sending a terse text asking if they could stay at the farm rather than booking a hotel. I declined, recommending the inn downtown instead. The boundaries I'd spent years building in therapy wouldn't be breached for their convenience. Seeing them for the first time in nearly 2 decades was surreal. They arrived at the funeral home for the memorial service Grandpa had requested before the will reading. Both looked older but prosperous, my father's hair now silver at the temples, my mother's face suspiciously unlined for a woman in her 60s. They wore expensive, subdued clothing, perfect for the somber occasion, but also clearly designed to impress. "Rebecca, darling," my mother exclaimed, moving to embrace me as if we'd been separated for weeks rather than abandoned for years. I accepted her hug stiffly, noting how she air-kissed near my cheek to avoid disturbing her makeup. "You look wonderful. European life has been so hectic, but we've thought of you often." My father shook my hand formally, then seemed to remember this was insufficient and pulled me into an awkward embrace that smelled of expensive cologne. "You've grown into quite the young woman." William must have been proud. "He was," I replied simply. "He showed up for all of it." If they caught the barb, they didn't acknowledge it. Instead, they spent the memorial service performing grief, dabbing at dry eyes and sharing sanitized memories of Grandpa with attendees who had actually been present in his life. I watched their performance with detached fascination, noting how many of the genuinely grieving locals kept their distance, aware of the true family dynamics at play. Following the service, my parents made clumsy attempts to reconnect, asking surface questions about my life while repeatedly mentioning the family business of settling Grandpa's estate. Their transparent agenda would have been comical if it weren't so painful. "We should discuss the farmhouse," my father said over coffee at the reception. "As a family, it's quite valuable property, but sentimental too, of course." "Of course," I echoed, thinking of the 18 birthdays, 18 Christmases, and countless ordinary days they had chosen to miss within its walls. The actual will reading took place in Mr. Henderson's wood-paneled office the following morning. The atmosphere was tense as we gathered around his conference table, my parents, myself, Grandpa's longtime housekeeper Mrs. Collins, his friend and business partner Mr. Abernathy, and 2 other lawyers I didn't recognize. My parents sat unnaturally straight, their expressions carefully composed into masks of respectful anticipation. I wore Grandpa's key openly around my neck, drawing strength from its weight against my collarbone. Mr. Henderson adjusted his glasses and began reading the formal language of the will. My parents leaned forward slightly as he described the extent of the estate, the investment portfolios, the farmhouse property, the commercial real estate holdings in 3 states, the art collection, and various other assets totaling just over $45 million. I saw my mother's hand tighten around my father's arm, her knuckles whitening as the figures were detailed. Their performance of grief was abandoned now, replaced by naked anticipation. Then came the first surprise. "The bulk of the estate, Mr. Henderson read, is to be placed in the William Mitchell Family Trust, with specific disbursement instructions." My father's smile froze. "Family trust? What exactly does that entail?" Mr. Henderson continued reading without acknowledging the interruption. "Rebecca Mitchell is named as the primary trustee, with full discretionary control over all trust assets and disbursements." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. My mother's carefully composed expression cracked. "That can't be right," she interjected. "James is William's son. Surely he intended." "If you'll allow me to continue," Mr. Henderson said firmly, "the will addresses this directly. What followed was Grandpa's masterpiece, a carefully structured trust that essentially placed me in control of any inheritance my parents might receive. There were provisions for the farmhouse to remain mine exclusively, along with a significant portion of the liquid assets to secure my future. The remainder, still a fortune by any standard, was in the trust, with me as gatekeeper. As the details emerged, my parents' facade crumbled completely. My father's face flushed deep red, while my mother's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide her growing fury. "This is outrageous," my father finally exploded when Mr. Henderson finished the relevant sections. My father was clearly not of sound mind. "We'll contest this immediately." Mr. Mitchell anticipated that response. Mr. Henderson replied calmly. "Which brings us to the matter of the box." All eyes turned to the antique wooden box that sat on a side table, which Mr. Henderson's assistant had brought in before the meeting. I recognized it immediately from Grandpa's study. William left explicit instructions that this box be opened only after the will reading, and only by Rebecca, using the key he provided her. My hand went instinctively to the key around my neck. My parents watched with poorly disguised resentment as I rose and approached the box. The key fit perfectly into the ornate brass lock. With a deep breath, I turned it, hearing the satisfying click of the mechanism releasing. The heavy lid opened smoothly on well-oiled hinges. Inside was a carefully organized collection of documents, photographs, and letters. On top lay a sealed envelope with my name written in Grandpa's distinctive handwriting. I opened it first, aware of all eyes upon me. "Dear Rebecca," I read aloud, my voice steady despite the emotion tightening my throat. "If you're reading this, then Mr. Henderson has explained the trust arrangements I've established. I imagine your parents are not pleased. The contents of this box will explain my decisions and provide you with everything you need to enforce my wishes or, should you choose, to amend them according to your own judgment, which I have come to trust implicitly." The box contained meticulous documentation of my parents' abandonment, copies of the guardianship papers they'd signed, the email confirming they had no intention of returning for me, bank records showing they had liquidated all their assets before leaving the country, including my college fund. There were dozens of letters they'd written to Grandpa over the years, each requesting money for various ventures or investments, none mentioning me except as an afterthought. Phone records showed they had called him regularly not to check on my welfare, but to pressure him for financial support. Most damning was evidence they had consulted lawyers about having Grandpa declared incompetent 5 years earlier, hoping to gain control of his assets before his death. The attempt had failed, but they had continued trying to manipulate him from afar. The final document was Grandpa's letter explaining the trust conditions. "The trust is structured to ensure Rebecca's security while offering James and Catherine an opportunity to demonstrate genuine change. As trustee, Rebecca has full discretion to distribute funds to them based on her assessment of their sincerity and behavior. This is not punishment, but accountability. They abandoned their child for financial gain. Now their financial gain depends on repairing the damage they caused. Whether they receive nothing or millions rests entirely on their actions and Rebecca's judgment." Silence filled the office as I finished reading. Then my mother's voice tight with fury. "This is ridiculous. He's trying to control us from the grave. We'll fight this." "I wouldn't advise that," said one of the unfamiliar lawyers, speaking for the first time. "I'm Martin Goldstein, from Prestige Law in Boston. Mr. Mitchell retained our firm specifically to defend against any challenges to this will. We've prepared extensively, including psychological evaluations confirming Mr. Mitchell's mental competence, witness testimonies regarding your abandonment of Rebecca, and evidence of your attempts to have him declared incompetent for financial gain. The will is airtight," added the other unknown lawyer. "Constructed specifically to withstand challenge. Fighting it would be expensive, public, and ultimately futile." My father's face had gone from red to ashen. "This is blackmail," he sputtered. "No," I said, finding my voice at last. "It's consequences." My mother turned to me, switching tactics with frightening speed. Her expression softened, her voice taking on a pleading quality I'd never heard before. "Rebecca, sweetie, you know we always wanted what was best for you. We made mistakes, certainly, but we're still family. Surely you don't want this ugliness between us. We can work something out privately, can't we?" Looking at her perfectly calculated expression of maternal concern, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The child in me who had waited by the phone for their calls, who had checked the mail daily for letters that never came, who had cried herself to sleep wondering what she'd done wrong, that child was finally at peace. "We can absolutely work something out," I said calmly. "On Grandpa's terms, not yours. You have my contact information. When you're ready to have an honest conversation about the past 18 years, I'll be available. Until then, there's nothing more to discuss." They left in a flurry of threats and accusations, my father promising legal action, my mother oscillating between pleading and venom. Mr. Henderson waited until the door closed behind them before offering me a small, approving smile. "Your grandfather was right about you," he said. "You have his backbone." As I gathered the contents of the box to take home, I felt neither triumph nor vengeance. Only a profound sense that a circle had closed. Grandpa had given me not just financial security, but something far more valuable, the power to define the terms of my relationship with the parents who had defined me as disposable. For the first time since they'd driven away 18 years earlier, the choice about our future was entirely mine. The threatened lawsuits never materialized. After consulting with multiple attorneys who all delivered the same verdict on their chances of success, my parents retreated to Switzerland to reconsider their approach. The silence that followed lasted 3 months, a familiar pattern, but this time, I wasn't the one waiting anxiously for contact. During that time, I immersed myself in grief and transition. The farmhouse felt eerily quiet without Grandpa's presence, yet I couldn't bring myself to leave it. Each room held memories of our life together, of the man who had chosen to be my parent when my biological ones abdicated the role. I began seeing Dr. Harmon again, processing not only the loss of Grandpa, but the complex emotions stirred up by my parents' reappearance. "I have all this power now," I confessed during one session, "but I don't know what to do with it. Part of me wants to deny them everything, to make them feel a fraction of what I felt." Another part wonders if Grandpa was right, if there's a path to something better. "What would something better look like to you?" she asked. The question haunted me for weeks. What did I actually want from the people who had abandoned me? Money had never motivated me, and revenge felt hollow. After much reflection, I realized what I truly wanted was acknowledgement, honest recognition of the harm they'd caused and genuine remorse, not performed for financial gain, but as a step toward authentic connection. With this clarity, I drafted a letter outlining conditions for moving forward. They weren't punitive, but foundational: regular family therapy sessions, community service working with abandoned children, consistent communication not centered on money, and a detailed accounting of their decision to leave me behind and their lives since. "Meeting these requirements won't guarantee access to the trust funds," I wrote, "but refusing them guarantees you'll receive nothing. This isn't about punishment, but about rebuilding trust and demonstrating that your interest extends beyond Grandpa's money." Their initial response was predictably defensive. My father's email called my conditions insulting, and my mother suggested I was being vindictive. I didn't argue or justify. I simply reiterated that my terms were non-negotiable and wished them well. 6 weeks later, they contacted me again. Their tone had shifted from indignation to reluctant acceptance. They agreed to my conditions with minimal negotiation, though I suspected financial necessity rather than emotional growth motivated their compliance. Our first family therapy session via video conference was excruciating. We sat in 3 different countries, me in Massachusetts, my father in Switzerland, my mother temporarily in France, facing each other through screens after nearly 2 decades of separation. The therapist, Dr. Lavigne, was skillful but direct, refusing to allow my parents to gloss over the abandonment with vague references to unfortunate circumstances or difficult decisions. "You left your 14-year-old daughter on her birthday," Dr. Levine stated flatly. "Let's start by acknowledging that reality." For 2 hours, we circled around the truth, my parents offering justifications that crumbled under gentle but persistent questioning. The session ended with little resolution but a commitment to continue the process. The following weeks brought incremental progress. My father began volunteering at a youth center in Geneva, initially going through the motions but gradually developing genuine connections with the teenagers there. My mother, always more image-conscious, struggled more visibly with the therapy process, but eventually began working with a refugee resettlement organization helping displaced families. During our 5th session, something unexpected happened. As we discussed the email they had sent confirming they wouldn't return for me, my mother suddenly broke down. "I knew it was wrong," she sobbed, her carefully maintained facade cracking completely. "I knew it, but I convinced myself you'd be better off with William than following us around Europe while we tried to rebuild." Then it got easier to keep believing that lie than face what we'd done. It was the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her since childhood. Not calculated, not performed, but raw and real. My father, witnessing her breakdown, seemed to deflate, years of defensiveness giving way to quiet acknowledgement. "We failed you," he said simply. "I failed you." My father was right about me all along. That session marked a turning point. The pretense that they had acted in my best interest finally abandoned, we could begin discussing the real damage and potential repair. I didn't offer immediate forgiveness. That would have been premature and dishonest. But I did offer continued engagement. Meanwhile, I was building my own life with the resources Grandpa had left me. I expanded my marketing consultancy, hiring a small team and moving into proper offices in town. Using a portion of my inheritance, I established the William Mitchell Foundation supporting programs for children in kinship care arrangements like the one that had saved me. I dated occasionally, still cautious, but increasingly open to vulnerability. When I met Daniel, a landscape architect working on the foundation's first community garden project, our connection developed slowly but steadily, built on honest communication and mutual respect. His patience with my trust issues and genuine interest in understanding my past helped heal wounds I'd thought permanent. My parents' journey back into my life progressed unevenly. There were setbacks. My father's occasional reversion to entitled behavior, my mother's instinct to maintain appearances rather than address uncomfortable truths. But there was also genuine effort. They began asking questions about my life and actually listening to the answers. They remembered birthdays and holidays without prompting. The performative aspects of their behavior gradually gave way to something more authentic, if still imperfect. 6 months after the will reading, I made my first distribution from the trust, a modest amount to help them relocate from Switzerland back to the United States, making regular in-person family therapy possible. It wasn't the windfall they had hoped for, but they accepted it with surprising grace. "We understand we need to earn your trust," my father said during the meeting where I presented the distribution paperwork. "We're grateful for the step." The words sounded rehearsed, but not insincere. People can learn new scripts, I realized, even late in life. By the 1-year anniversary of Grandpa's death, we had established a cautious relationship. Not the instant family reunion they might have initially envisioned, not the complete estrangement I had once thought permanent, but something evolving and conditional. They had moved to a small house about an hour from the farmhouse, close enough for regular contact, but with boundaries intact. On that anniversary, I invited them to the farmhouse for the first time. We walked the property together, and I showed them the memorial garden I'd planted using Grandpa's favorite varieties. As we stood by the young maple tree centered in the garden, I finally asked the question that had lingered since their return. "Do you regret it? Not the consequences or getting caught, but actually leaving me. If Grandpa hadn't left you anything in the will, would you still have come back?" My mother looked away, but my father met my gaze directly. I can't speak for your mother, but I've asked myself that question many times this year, he said. The honest answer is I don't know. I'd like to believe we would have found our way back eventually, but our track record doesn't support that. What I do know is that I regret leaving you every day, regardless of the will. The money brought us back, but it's not why we've stayed. It wasn't perfect absolution, but it was truthful. And after years of lies and evasions, truth felt like a gift. Grandpa once told me that money reveals character, but doesn't define it. His final lesson, orchestrated through the will and trust, proved this wisdom profoundly. Money had exposed my parents' worst instincts initially, but it had also created a pathway for potential redemption. Whether they would fully walk that path remained to be seen, but the opportunity existed because Grandpa had understood that people can change when given the right motivation and structure. As for me, the abandoned daughter transformed into gatekeeper and potential bridge, I had discovered strength I never knew I possessed. The power to set boundaries. The wisdom to offer chances without guaranteeing outcomes. The capacity to honor the past without being imprisoned by it. I still wear Grandpa's key around my neck, though the box it opened has served its purpose. It reminds me daily that what unlocks the future isn't forgetting the past, but learning its lessons and choosing which doors to open, which to close, and which to create entirely anew. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't a gift you give someone else. It's one you give yourself, not an excuse for others' actions, but freedom from letting those actions control your future. Some days I'm closer to that gift than others, but I'm moving steadily toward it, one honest conversation at a time. Have you ever had to rebuild trust with someone who hurt you deeply? What boundaries did you need to establish? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more reflections on family, healing, and the complicated journey toward forgiveness. Remember, your worth isn't determined by those who left, but by the strength you find in continuing forward. Thank you for being part of my journey today.